starting the November webinar for IICRC, and today I'm joined with a couple of my friends, Richard Driscoll, Paul Pritchard, Millie Washington, and Angelina Dixon. We're going to be going over the new S900. This is standard for professional remediation of precursors, drug residues, and associated chemical waste. Very interesting stuff. I'm super interested to see what's going on with this. And again, my name is Gavin, and I am the certified firm supervisor here. So if you are joining us with, from a certified firm's invitation, you will earn 1 hour of continuing education for attending our webinar today. So we appreciate you joining us. And then if you have any questions during the presentation, be sure to put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom menu bar. We'll ask those at the end, and then we should be good to go. I'll turn everything over to you, Millie, and let us know what you got in store for us.
Okay, thank you, Gavin, and good afternoon, good morning, good day to everyone. Welcome to the S900 webinar. Before we dive into the S900 standard itself, I'd just like to cover a couple of updates, things that may be of interest to you, new standards, just so you're kept up to date in terms of what we're doing here at IICRC Standards. And Gavin, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The first of the three standards that I want to touch on today as standards that we have very recently published is the ANSI IICRC S300 standard for upholstery cleaning, professional upholstery cleaning. The last edition of this standard was published in 2000, so lots of updates, and it's published now as an American national standard. And so, if this is of interest to you, please make sure that you grab an updated copy, 2025, of the standard, recently published September of 25. And with any luck, we hope to present a webinar on the new standard as well. Gavin, next slide. Okay, the second one I'm not going to spend any time talking about because I'm going to leave that up to our experts today, Richard and Paul. We'll get to that in just a minute. The S900 standard also published very recently as a first edition standard. We're very excited for this standard and for you to hear more about it. Next slide. And the last one is the S410 standard for professional cleaning of the built environment, specifically for infection prevention and control. Also standard, brand new first edition standard was published in September of 2025. And we hosted a certified firms webinar on the S410 in October. So if you missed it, feel free to catch a recording of that. Lots of good information and an overview of the new standard is included in the webinar. And next slide, Gavin. Thank you. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is just our standard subscriptions. All the standards that I just mentioned, the newer standards are developed revisions, reaffirmations, historical standards, everything is available to you via the IICRC standard subscription side. We also now have the organizational subscription, which allows larger companies to purchase multiple subscriptions in bulk and provide it across their employee base. We also now have new bundles. We have an inspection bundle for the subscription, a restoration bundle, and then a cleaning bundle. So if you're only interested in restoration standards or inspection standards, you can limit your purchase to a bundle that includes all of the standards that fall under that category. So I want to make sure that I share that. This is really the best value that we provide. It is an online subscription and really just easy to access, easy to find things, easy to search across all of our standards. So I can't recommend it highly enough. We will share the link to the subscription site as well. And with that, next slide, Gavin. Thank you. With that, here we go. We're ready now for today's webinar. And before we do that, I would like to introduce our co-presenters for the webinar. We have Richard Driscoll. Richard has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering and a Master's in Business Administration. Richard is Associate Professor at Webster University teaching basic accounting, marketing, and international business to MBA students. In addition, Richard is an IICRC Triple Master with 23 years of experience. He is an IICRC approved instructor for AMRT, WRT, TCST, and most recently, he has been chair of the IICRC consensus body that developed the S900 standard that we're going to hear more about. Our second co-presenter for today is Paul Pritchard. Paul is based in Christchurch, New Zealand, as National Training Manager for Cleaning Systems Limited. Paul has 30 plus years of experience in the specialist cleaning and restoration sector, 18 plus years as an approved IICRC instructor for HST, WRT, CCT, and UFT, and 15 plus years as a compliance certifier for hazardous substances for the EPA, then WorkSafe New Zealand. In addition, Paul is also involved with the Ministry of Business Innovation and Enterprise as an appointee to the NZS 8510 2017 Testing and Decontamination of Methamphetamine Contaminated Properties standard. And then last, and certainly quite importantly, Paul is the vice chair of the S900 consensus body. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard and Paul.
Next slide, please. I'm going to start real briefly, and then Paul's going to take over, and then I'm going to be at the back end of it. What we have here is a picture of most of the team members. And as the chair, one of the things I tried to do, and I hope I was successful, was really make this an international standard. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted Paul as my vice chair. As Millie noted, Paul is from New Zealand, okay? And we had, obviously, Paul. We had an Australian, we had a couple of Canadians, and the rest were Americans. But we tried the best we could to make sure it was not just an American standard, because the issues the S900 deals with are not just American issues, they're global issues. And that was why Paul, I give him a lot of credit, because he kept coming back saying, now, wait a minute, that may work in America, they don't work here. Okay, well, then let's fix it so it works there. So Paul was a huge asset. And with that, Paul, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Richard, and kia ora and good morning from down under, from New Zealand. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on this webinar, and to you, Millie, and also to the team there at IICRC. And I just wanted to really back up what Richard said. Richard was an amazing chair, kept things moving. If you've ever served on a committee, then you know how difficult things are that, and then you've got a difficult subject as well. A first for IICRC, where we're really getting involved in hazardous substances and chemicals and so forth. So I think it just went very well, and that's all ups. All congratulations to the actual committee members, because I've never sat on a committee where things have moved. Everyone seemed to be of one mind, and I think that was because Richard kept things moving. But I wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about some of the committee members. Apologies there, that was the best photo I had of the team, but there's a couple missing. There's Ron Legacy and David Mason, and also, so their names are not on the list, sorry, and also Anne Bedwell, who's on the far left there, you can see, her name's not in there as well. But I just want to sort of talk to some of the strengths that the committee brought. And you've already heard, obviously, Richard, Professor Richard Driscoll, and you've heard myself as well. I just wanted to talk to about some of these people and why that's so important to the development of such an important standard like the S900. Well, I mentioned Anne before. Anne, you know, she has served on a number of different development or consensus bodies of different standards, and so it was valuable having that input, that we could try and line up the S900 with other standards that had already been developed. And I always jokingly call her the grammar Nazi because she basically kept us on track as far as all the grammar and making things make sense when we wrote them down. Patrick Moffat, apologies here, Patrick, we didn't have your photo, but he probably doesn't really need to be talked about because he's kind of like the, I don't know, the guru, the prophet, the whatever you want to call him of the IICRC as far. I think he's probably written more white papers than anybody else. But of course, his input was invaluable with his background as an industrial hygienist and so forth. You've got Dr. Jackie Wright there. She's in the middle of the picture there with the peach-coloured top on. And Jackie is probably, as mentioned before, she's with Flinders University in New South Wales, and she's probably one of the lead people throughout the world on residues, as far as drug residues on different surfaces. So it was so important to have her input into the standard. You've got Jim Thompson, of course, in the black shirt. I think again, probably most people know Jim very well. So he's standing next to Richard there to the right of the picture. And Jim is probably, when it came to, well, we were talking about this later on, but when it came to exposure level 4s, which are the extreme exposure levels, extreme danger, that's where he really came of value, along with Patrick, because that's really his forte. And he's probably the only person I know of, I don't know whether this is a cool thing or not, but he's the only one I know that can pretty much quote any chapter and verse of the OSHA 1910 and OSHA 1926, by heart. So I don't know whether that's a good quality or not. We've got Sherry Gaither. Sherry is standing fourth from the right in the front there, and she's again served on other standards, and she really came with the insurance perspective, the payment. Let's face it, at the end of the day, that's probably the most important thing. Are we going to get paid? She came from the insurance perspective, a loss adjuster, assessor perspective, and that again was invaluable. Patrick Hartshorn, he's based, I believe, in Alaska, and he also is from an industrial hygienist background, working on, they're doing a lot up in Alaska with, actually trying to get it accepted into legislation. So excellent input. Ryan Despain, he's the smiling gentleman, second from the right. Ryan is based out of Utah, and he's I forget what the qualification is, but it's kind of a nationally accepted or nationally certified paramedic. So, his input was so valuable because we were getting it from a first responder perspective, and he knew all about things like Narcan and responding to emergencies where people have been accidentally exposed, or sometimes sadly not accidentally. We've got Tom Slattery as well. Tom is in the coral pink shirt with the tie on, and Tom has been doing training in this area for many, many years. Very, very respected trainer, particularly in the meth side of things, like most of us, but also now into the fentanyl side of things. So I just really wanted to highlight that sort of whole team. And of course, there was a whole lot of other people who weren't voting members of the consensus body, but they were contributors who we called in, you might say, subject matter experts on various things that we needed some guidance in as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge him. But if you want to see the complete list of consensus body members, it's on page 6 of the S900, and also, what where we're from and so forth. Maybe we could move to the next slide, please, Gavin. A little bit of background. This took around 6 years, just over 6 years of a lot of hard work. We were meeting every second week, every fortnight, for 2-hour sessions. and they were very, very productive sessions. And then we met face to face annually, usually at the annual instructors meeting, which takes place in Las Vegas. And so there, a lot of hard work, dedicated hours and input put into it. Of course, it went through the usual approval process. It had to go through ANSI. It had to go before it even went to the board of directors and ANSI, it had to go through legal. It had to go through all sorts of, and then of course, one of the most important things is it went through 2 rounds of public review, which is standard procedure for an ANSI standard. So that was important because obviously that gave an opportunity for our peers and the public and so forth to be able to make comment. And we received some excellent, not as much as I would have thought actually or suspected. So I would either take that, I would assume that's because most people seem to be fairly happy with what was written. But very important process to get your feedback, basically, get the public feedback, and to really have a look at that. So we really appreciate all those people who did make a comment, which we individually went through and responded to every single comment that was there. And then, of course, this had led to the standard being released in September of this year. So not that long ago. Next slide, please, Kevin. So some key highlights about the document. It's approximately 55 pages. I think in total it's something like 62, but of course there's all the acknowledgements and the references and so forth, but actual sort of 55 pages we worked on. And if you've been able to get a copy, I would really strongly suggest you get one if you're involved in this sort of work. You need it. There is 14 sections. And if you've got that copy in front of you and you haven't had a chance to maybe, read through it in its entirety, so word to the wise, I would probably select the real key sections that I feel anyway would be section 4, which is, let me just check in my own copy. It's the levels of contamination. This is probably one of the most important because this really, I guess it's similar. If you've ever read the WRT stuff, the S900 stuff, you've got those categories of contamination, and then you've got the scope or the levels of the job. So section 4 is sort of really sort of lining up with that. We've got, but we call them exposure levels, and there's 4 of those, and we're going to Richard's going to get into some detail about that a little bit later on. But so section 4 is very, very important. Section 10 also, and section 12. Section 10 is the structural remediation, and that has some important information around a lot of Jackie's work actually around residues and so forth. And then contents remediation, same thing. There'll be some important charts there, all using this exposure level 1 to 4 system. Lots of references in the back, international references, and as far as I'm aware, that it's sort of a significant first for IICRC, because if you look at the reference section in the back, you'll see that it's listing a whole raft of, from North America, from the United States, Canada, England, New Zealand, Australia, of course. So it is a truly international document, as Richard mentioned right at the start. And I think that's a significant first because, this is a global issue. People in our sector, in our industry, are at risk. And I want to point out, this is not a document for first responders, really. This is for us. This is for the restoration industry, the cleaning industry, people who are going in and cleaning up after the first responders have been there. And of course, we're still at huge risk. And that's really what was sort of paramount in the back of our minds as we developed the standard. Go to the next slide, please, Kevin. So there's the sections I was talking about. You might want to make a note. Section 4, very important one to read through and get those levels of contamination, locked in the back of your minds. And Rich is going to be talking specifically what they mean soon. And then 10, the structural remediation. 12, contents remediation. Very, very important. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before how important the references were and how important international standards were used. This is just to give you some examples of the type of things that we were referring to. Some of the foundational references, a lot of it was from the US EPA. There is some feeling that perhaps the voluntary guidelines that were done in 2021 were probably a little light, particularly on the safety side of things. And so but we certainly, as far as the remediation side of things, used a lot of that information. There was an updated sort of information that was produced by the US EPA in 2023, referred to that. And there was plenty of other international standards. The one that I worked on, the New Zealand Standard 8510-2017. But you can see by the dates that a lot of these are sort of, and as we went through, we examined a lot of the state standards or the state information in the United States, and we sort of come across the same thing. A lot of it was a good 10, 15 years out of date. A lot of it was even long before fentanyl was even a thing. So a lot of it was sort of meth was the concern. But I might just jump into the next slide, if that's all right. What I want to sort of stress is what it doesn't cover. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it does cover, what it doesn't cover. But obviously, we couldn't specify what your local or regional threshold limits are for every single drug. For one thing, there's just too many drugs, and there's too many new drugs that are entering the market, continually, sadly. Another big issue with why we couldn't set specific limits is there are too many different limits. Just to give you an example, in New Zealand, we actually have 2 different limits for methamphetamine residue alone. So you can see one there, which is sort of the official limit, if you like. The New Zealand standard is 1.5 micrograms per 100 centimetres square. But there is sort of an unofficial or government, if you like, standard, which is 15. So a huge jump between the two. Why is that? Well, often you find that when you start analysing all these different limits, a lot of them are politically motivated. So we had to be very careful. We wanted to be apolitical with this S900 standard. So that's one of them. Another important reason why we don't set regional threshold limits. And of course, another big thing, things for example, car fentanyl, some drug thresholds, what's safe and unsafe is completely unknown at this time. Research is still being done. Another complication was the proliferation of what we term polydrugs or mixed drugs, which, for example, in different areas, you might have, for example, in San Francisco area, you have the drug tranq, which is a mixture of fentanyl, sometimes carfentanil, and xylazine, an animal tranquilizer. So, and there's all sorts of variations. It could be anything. Quite commonly now in other cities like Chicago and places like that, you might have a mixture of fentanyl with meth, or fentanyl with cocaine or heroin, or goodness knows what else. So that's something to keep in mind too in the cleanup, is that often we're not just dealing with one type of drug. So this is not, don't make the mistake to think that the S900 is a meth and fentanyl cleanup standard. It's covering a multitude of substances, including what makes them the precursors. Also, you see that some drugs are regionally popular or trending. As an example, in New Zealand, we've had a resurgence of, we still have meth, we still have fentanyl is gaining ground, but we still have other drugs that were, sort of, I don't know how you describe it, uncool, if that's the right term. They were very popular back in the 80s and early 90s, but we're seeing a resurgence of those drugs. One example of that is cocaine. So that's why we couldn't cover everything. That's why it doesn't cover certain things. And some people might be disappointed that we haven't set regional threshold limits, but you can see there's just too many reasons why we couldn't. Can I have the next slide? Thanks, Gavin. To illustrate why I said that this is not a meth and fentanyl standard, because it actually covers all these drugs and more, and probably still ones that are being developed. We've actually future-proofed the S900. So what you can see here is just a huge amount of, all these are covered in the S900. And what you're not seeing here is all the precursors, all the substances that go into manufacturing these products as well. So you can see why it took so much work, so much effort for us to develop the S900 standard. Could I have the next slide? Something that I think is very important, what it does cover is, and this talks about this right on page 3, right at the start of the publication. This standard provides the procedures and precautions for cleaning sites contaminated with precursors, drug residues, and chemical waste. So it's right through the whole manufacture process. Having said that, a lot of people aren't aware, or they focus in on manufacturing sites. And research around the world indicates that there is actually less. In fact, the United States EPA information, written right there in their own document, says that fentanyl in particular, there's actually less sites. They're finding less and less sites. Now, there could be a reason for this. It could be that law enforcement is doing a better job and controlling it better. I don't think so. It could be a reason, but I doubt it. The reason is they're not manufacturing a lot anymore in the countries that we're seeing it pop up around the world. Most of it is being manufactured in China, and it's been imported, already built up, and into the United States, Australia, New Zealand, so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. And a lot of the studies are showing that actually user sites, not the manufacturing sites, user sites are the ones that actually have higher levels of contamination, higher levels of residue. And that would make sense too, because a lot of the manufacturing sites that are still being done, they're either being used to just turn it into something else, they're cutting or mixing it with something else, and they are very sophisticated sites. You might say they're almost a like commercial laboratory type setup. So there is very little residue or problem. So that's something I think that really needs to get out there, because I've seen even government departments, so forth, are really focusing on the manufacturing sites. And the S900 doesn't just deal with manufacturing sites. We're dealing with anywhere contamination might occur. And that all the studies show that that's happening more and more at user sites, where people are either smoking the drug or whatever it happens to be, or cutting the drug or whatever. A critical prerequisite that's mentioned right in on page, I think it's around about page 3, very early on in the standard, is that this is not really designed for first responders. This is for the people cleaning up after the first responders have released the site. And that's a critical prerequisite. The scene must be released by law enforcement or regulatory agencies before we go. And having said that, in many situations, when you're looking at what's happening, if contamination is at user sites, law enforcement is completely unaware of it. So it could be that we, as a industry, as restoration experts, cleaning experts, are going in, and law enforcement is completely unaware of it. So it's an important distinction to make. Of course, another thing it doesn't cover is there could be a number of hazardous materials that are either there because they're precursors, or often it's just because of the nature of the site. But things like asbestos, lead, mercury, and on pesticides, and of course a lot of biological contaminants. Some of these sites, well, almost all those sites are going to have bloodborne pathogens or body fluids or whatever there is present as well. So why doesn't it cover those things? Well, because they're covered in other standards. Like biological contaminants, of course, are in the S900. You've got other legislation around the world, like asbestos. New Zealand has legislation for asbestos. Australia has legislation. The United States, all the various states have, so that's covered under that. So we don't obviously get into that. Next slide. I think this is sort of self-explanatory. Obviously, regulations vary throughout the world, and so we haven't. While we do mention this, we always point to those. Some people sort of say, well, if I take the course when it's developed for this, will I walk out the other end, fully qualified, ready to rock and roll? And of course, that's not the objective of the standard. And you couldn't develop a course like that because of the local regulations that vary. And I mean, it would be a bit like learning to drive, wouldn't it? You go to, in the States, I believe you can get it done at high school. Here in New Zealand, you have to do it privately, go to a private school, and you learn how to drive. And the driving school or the high school or whoever, they teach you, about the regulations. They teach you how to actually practically drive the car, and et cetera, et cetera. But you don't necessarily rock out of there with your license, do you? You then have to go to the licensing agency, whatever that happens to be, whether it's the police or in New Zealand, it's the New Zealand Transport Authority. You go and get your license, taking the qualifications that you've learned at whatever school it was. So it's a similar thing. You're not going to rock out of here, fully certified, ready to you're going to, but this is the place that you're going to learn at the IICRC. The goal of the remediation too is obviously where there isn't any guidelines, which some of the drugs don't really have any. We've already established they don't have set threshold limits. Then the objective is obviously just to get it clean and habitable and safe for people to reoccupy that space. Another key thing that is just hammered through the S900, just like it is through the S500, the S520, 540, etc., is that you must document everything that you're doing. It's so important. And where other regulations or guidelines are being used, then obviously you're documenting them. If they supersede the S900, well, then you need to document that you're following them for that reason. So I sort of can't stress that enough. And then finally, you'll see this term practitioner. This is a new term to the IICRC, but in the past, you might have been called a technician or whatever, but you'll see when you read through the explanation in the S900, why we've used the term practitioner and why things are left to the practitioner's discretion. So in the absence of any established rules, which could be quite common with some drugs, the practitioner can develop their own remediation plan as long as they've documented everything and why they've done it that way. Can I have the next slide? This really, I'll hand over to Pritchard, and he's going to get sort of more into the nitty-gritty of how the S900 works.
Thanks, Paul. Paul covered a lot of one I want to touch because that's just the way we sort of kind of left hand, right hand. This is probably the most important chart in the whole document, the whole S900. Now, what this has to do with is you need to determine before you do anything, what are you getting into? Now, Paul introduced a term a minute ago called practitioner. That's not a new word in the English language, but it's a new word for us. And the reason we chose that is there can be a lot of people who, if you will, become involved. And when we say involved, we're not talking about, say, some insurance company that is 200 miles away reading something. We're talking about people who are going to get into it. In other words, there's going to be some level of actually being involved on the site, on the location. And so we called those practitioners rather than trying to list out industrial hygienists, property owners, technicians, supervisors, blah, blah, blah. We called them all just practitioners. And what's important is determining what am I getting into? And that's where we get into the 4 exposure levels. And so walking through this, you got to figure out what you got. You can't just walk in and go, oh, this is methamphetamine. How do you know it's methamphetamine? If it hasn't been tested by a qualified industrial hygienist, you don't know what you got. You really don't. Okay. Well, somebody said they were smoking meth in here. Okay. How do you know that? Okay. So what we looked at is, and we determined 4 exposure levels. Obviously, 1, 2, 3, and 4. A little bit like the S900 categories of water. Category 1, we call clean. Category 2, we call gray. Category 3, we call black. Obviously, the level of contamination gets worse from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. Same is true with this. Number 1, you don't need a lot of personal protective equipment, okay? Now, when we got involved in this, we also looked at what would you do, say, and now I know it's a little bit over the edge, but it's what would you do if you got called into an apartment where people had been just smoking? Okay, in other words, we had nicotine tar residual. You need to clean it up. You don't really need much personal protective equipment. Okay, then what's a little bit worse? A little bit worse is what we call level 2. Okay, now level 2, we're beginning to get into things that can be worse. Galvin, I want to jump to the next slide, and you and I are going to go backwards and forwards, okay? So as an example, level 1, a marijuana location. What do you got to clean? I mean, smoke residual, leaves, again, not really a major issue. Level 2, we start getting into the residuals from precursors. Now, if you're not familiar with what the term precursor means, that means the raw substances that were used to make stuff, okay? So now we could get into places where we got to do with meth, heroin, cocaine, and others, okay? One of the things when we wrote the 900 was we tried to not get ourselves locked into this is it. And the reason we did that is because, as Paul mentioned, new drugs are coming out all the time. And so what we tried to do is write it, but also leave it a little bit open-ended for the drug that's invented in 2027, rather than, oh, this standard doesn't apply because this drug isn't mentioned in here. Okay, as Paul showed you with a couple of his charts, there's a whole lot of stuff out there. Okay, now, Gavin, can you go backwards 1, please? Thank you, sir. So 2, we're starting to get hazard situations. Now, level 3, we begin to get into real issues, okay? And now, if you come down the chart, if you go into the 900, you'll see what it says you need for personal protective equipment, okay? I mean, it's already in there that if you've made the determination, an industrial hygienist has made the determination that's level 3, then this is the kind of PPE you need to wear, and that's in the S900. You'll also notice if you're following level 3 down, decon property, okay? Well, that means you may have to decontaminate stuff. It may also mean you got to decontaminate you. In other words, your personal protective equipment may become contaminated, and you may need to decontaminate you rather than, as an example, as a sewer job, you come out, your Tyvek suit's covered in poo. You take it off, throw it away. That may not work at level 3. Gavin, can you go forward again to the table? Thank you. So when we get to level 3, we're getting from, notice it now says high risk. All right, so now we're going into manufacturing sites, okay, which, as Paul noted, there's probably not a lot of them in the West, in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the United States. Now, you might get called into, if you were in Arizona or New Mexico, get called across the border into Mexico. I'd worry about getting paid on that one, but okay. Well, obviously at high risk, then we're going to need to have better personal protective equipment, okay? Now, the one we're most concerned about is EL4. And this is where Paul was talking about sites that the drugs are consumed. All right, they're going to be contaminated, and they can be highly contaminated. All right, and so Paul or Galvin, could you go back to EL4? Thank you, sir. All right, now we got, again, we're going to make sure, and if you look at the very top where it says EL4, immediately dangerous toward life and health. This is the places you can die. And that's one of our overriding concerns, is that you could literally, if you get fentanyl on your skin, or God forbid you inhale it, you can die. And that's one of our biggest concerns that they had when we wrote this, is this is not like cleaning up a sewer job. This is not like doing mold remediation. This is one of the things that if it's done wrong, you're dead. And that is very frightening to me, because I'm concerned that some people are going to just, oh, hey, I read the S900. I'm qualified. I can go out and clean up. Man, if you don't know what you're doing. And that was why Ryan was so important to our team that Paul mentioned, because he's an EMT. He's a responder. He's seen the results of what can happen. And he pounded us pretty hard about this one. But this table right here, and then all of the subsequent text that goes with it, is probably the most significant part of the S900. Galvin, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. All right. Paul and I have been talking for 45 minutes. We'll throw it open. Gavin, have we got anything in the chat box?
We do. We have one question from Salvador. He said, Narcan, emergency treatment of opioid overdose, is still okay to reverse some of those effects? Question mark.
All right, I'm going to try to answer that one. First of all, I am not a practicing physician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a nurse. So my medical expertise, you got to really go, My understanding is if dosed out quick enough, it will reverse the effects of fentanyl. That's my understanding, recognizing I'm not a physician. Okay, I hate to make medical comments when that's not but my understanding is yes.
And just to add to that, Richard, for Salvador, bear in mind that a lot of the drugs now, you're not just dealing with pure fentanyl or pure whatever. Often they're mixed. So while naloxone or Narcan or whatever you want to call it is recommended. In fact, I think in level 3 and level 4, it's recommended that if all practitioners be carrying that on jobs. But just remember, there could be other drugs in the mix as well, which are not opioids. And so, yeah, just that comment.
Yeah, if you when you read the EL4 levels, you're going, as a practitioner, you're going to be frightened, and you should be. It's going to be, to do an EL4, a meth site, or a fentanyl, or even worse, a carfentanil. If you don't understand the difference between fentanyl and carfentanil, right? Fentanyl is designed for humans. It's a relaxing drug. Okay, in other words, when it's typically used under physician's control, typically it's given, and I had abdominal surgery 10 weeks ago. They gave me fentanyl before they put me to sleep. In other words, they wanted to calm me down, and that's what it's designed for, okay? Carfentanil is designed to calm down large animals like elephants. It is significantly stronger than fentanyl. And so again, drugs just keep coming along. Okay. We got any other questions?
Excellent. He says, thank you. Not seeing any other questions. If anybody does have any questions for our amazing presenters, Paul and Richard, please answer here. Okay, so we got one from Matt Peretti. He says, how should we dispose of PPE when dealing with level 4? Great question.
Okay, the way you're going to have to dispose of level 4 is you're going to have to, first of all, decontaminate it. Okay, that means probably you're going to have like a child's wading pool, and you're going to wash the suit off. Okay, then it is technically clean. Then you're going to bag it, double bag it, and then you're going to have it burned.
And just so you know, Matt, that's covered in section 13, the packaging, transport and disposal of unsalvageable waste. So at level 4, your PPE is considered unsalvageable waste. So that section takes you through, and of course there is going to be local legislation that applies, etc. But all that's dealt with in section 13.
Yeah, Paul's comment is very appropriate. We tried to come up with, the only term I can use, best practice. But states in America have legislation or rules. Provinces in Canada have different rules. Obviously, New Zealand, Australia have their rules. Now, they're all kind of somewhat related, but they're not identical. And so if you're working in California, if you're working in New South Wales, if you're working in Ontario, Canada, you got to know what the local rules are. And you're going to find a lot of places there aren't rules. I mean, there really aren't. One of the things that drove Paul and I crazy was we had hoped that there would be a whole pile of legislation. Now it'd be different, but we could sort through it and take the best practice. There ain't a lot of stuff out there, and most of it is really dated. And some of it, because it's dated, is actually wrong. So welcome to the world.
Excellent. I do have a couple more questions here rolling in. This question from Gregory Buffle. Does Benefent Quantum work in cleaning meth fentanyl off surfaces?
That's one I'm not going to be able to answer. My opinion would be no. And the reason, now this is a uninformed opinion, but he said cleaning. Disinfectants are not cleaners. Okay, they're not. Disinfectants are killers. Cleaner. Now, I'm going to tell you the best cleaner in the world is going to drive some of you nuts. The best cleaner in the world, believe it or not, is Dawn dishwashing detergent. It really is. And I know you go, well, it can't be because you can buy it in a grocery store. So what? The chemists at Procter & Gamble who created it created one heck of a good cleaning process. So relative to cleaning, I'm going to dance on your question because of lack of knowledge. Now, if there's documentation from Benefact that says it does, I would love to see that. I'm not going to disagree with it, but I'd love to see it. I have a tendency to not believe most marketing stuff because I'm an engineer and, prove it to me. Prove it to me. I'll shut up and tell you it's good stuff, but I don't know the answer to your question. I'm sorry. Paul, do you have any input on that?
Probably very much the same. I'm again sorry to sort of give you an answer without giving you an answer, but if you look at, in fact, that document that's quoted there, the United States EPA, I think it was fentanyl you mentioned, you were questioning. If it was fentanyl, it does talk about that in the methamphetamine guidelines from then, the procedure. It doesn't say any particular product or brand, but it does give the procedure, and so do we in the S900. So I guess it's one of those, let the reader use discernment.
Yeah, but you said you had a couple more?
Yeah, we got another one from Tyson Wilmerth. Does your standard address or suggest products we should be using to clean with? So it's on the similar line from the last.
No, it does not. Okay, and the reason for that is honestly, the standard is the standard. It's not meant to be a sales tool. Okay, and are there products out there? Yes. Are they in the standard? No. Will we talk about them when we have a class? Because obviously part of the class is going to be how you do this. The answer to that is kind of, sort of, but the IICRC is not per se in the commercial business of saying you got to buy Dick's number 7 because it's the solution for everything. You with me? We don't go there. Matter of fact, as an instructor, and Paul and I have both run into this, we're pushed pretty hard by the board of directors at the IICRC to not specifically state this is what you got to have. Okay, I'm sorry I'm dancing on your question, but that's where we're at.
My understanding as well, we don't promote individual products, but I do have another very long question here. It looks like from Levi Brooks. When a practitioner is attempting to establish the EL without knowing what type of activity was taking place at the property, user or manufacturer, for example, someone may have rented a hotel room for one cook, returning relatively low levels of residual contamination, but someone may have been a user in a home for many years, but sampling returns high levels similar to a cookhouse. Referencing the table in section 10, remediation, the hotel room with low contamination but being a manufacturer site falls into the EL3 category and should have the plasterboard removed from the area. However, the user house with high levels falls under EL2 category and can be maybe cleaned. Is there anything else I can use to differentiate between the two and or whether materials require removal or not?
Paul, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sure. For that, of course, the table on page 49, in fact, the whole of chapter 10, we don't sort of refer to what the actual sites are, purely what the levels are that are coming back from the sampling. So that would really determine what is the levels coming back from your specialized expert who's doing the sampling. Or you could actually do the sampling yourself, but you'd be having to send it off to a certified laboratory. And that's really what determines what needs to be either removed or maybe cleaned. But that chart doesn't actually specify whether it's a manufacturing site or a user site for that very reason, because user sites can be higher than manufacturing sites. I hope that answers your question, Levi.
Yeah,
It comes back to sampling again.
It does. Yeah.
We don't know what we don't know, and you can't really trust. Well, this is what was going on in that room. Maybe yes, maybe no. And so before we dive in, we got to determine the EL level, and virtually every job, not 100%, but virtually every job is going to require an industrial hygienist or an indoor environmental professional, whichever one of those terms you want to use.
right on. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I think that'll be the last one that we have time for. But I just want to thank you guys for joining us. Paul, especially you halfway across the world, joining us in a weird time zone, I'm sure for you, for us. So thanks again for, lending your expertise to us. We always appreciate you. Same for you, Richard. Everything you said was super informational, and I hope everybody in this line of work goes and gets a copy of the S900. It's super helpful. For any of our certified firms that are still in attendance, your CECs will be awarded. Give me about 2 to 4 business days to get that done for you, and you'll see them on your profiles. And then that's really all I have. If you do have any other questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. My direct email is G, and then my last name, McMahon, MCMAHON, @iicrcnet.org. You can always shoot me an email there, and I'll be happy to get you the right people or answer your question myself if I can. So that's all I have for this. Millie, would you like to add anything?
One quick thing, and then I'll go away. Again, if anybody has any follow-on questions, scoot it to Kevin, and he will forward it on to Paul or I or whoever is appropriate so that we can get you the answer. And I can tell you that if Paul and I don't have the answer, the other team members who were on the S900, we got some real brain power. So again, if you got a question, scoot it to Gavin. He'll scoot it on to us, and we'll get you the answer. Millie, over to you.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to Paul and to Richard and to the entire consensus body that did the hard work of putting the standard together. We are very excited to have it published as an American national standard, and we hope that you will grab a copy, as Richard said. Thank you so much for your time today.